Welcome everyone to this bonus session as part of the IfM's recent briefing, COVID-19 Manufacturing at a Turning Point. We received such a high volume of questions from the audience during our initial session, we've decided to record this a further 30 minutes to try and answer them all. And to aid that endeavour, I'm delighted to be joined once again by four leading experts at the Institute for Manufacturing, which is part of the University of Cambridge, to hear their thoughts on the future of manufacturing post-COVID-19. I'm your host, Johnny Williamson, editor of The Manufacturer, and here is your panel of experts. We have Tim Minchell, Dr. John C. Taylor, Professor of Innovation and Head of the Institute for Manufacturing, Duncan McFarlane, Professor of Industrial Engineering and Head of the Distributed Information and Automation Lab at the IfM, and Carlos Lopez Gomez, Head of Policy Links Unit, IfM Education and Consultancy Service. Well, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Let's start with our first question then, and it really goes to the heart of what many people are asking for in this manufacturing recovery, and that's how can businesses come back and have a green agenda. They've placed sustainability at the heart of everything they do, not necessarily just the materials they use or the logistics services they employ. Duncan, let's go to you first. How can manufacturers work towards this green recovery?
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, I mean, my immediate view on that question is there's an enormous opportunity, and it's one that's almost been imposed on us anyway, that trying to operate in the post-COVID period is actually requiring all sorts of changes to our operating approaches in terms of using smaller workforces on site, using more digital tools to access systems, to finding way. Actually, almost everything we're doing at the moment is saving energy, saving and reducing emissions in what we're doing. So, you know, my sense is one of the challenges we're going to have in manufacturing is to not go back to where we were before the COVID period began, but to actually take advantage of some of the gains we've had in remote digital tools and in the way we operate, and minimizing the movements of our workforce, being much more efficient at the way we deliver goods in order to keep them under control during the COVID phase. And there's an immediate green gain if we can actually sustain some of the methods that we're actually developing to manage in the post-COVID period into the future.
Tim, what are your thoughts on that? Maybe in terms of the design process, making the product green right from the outset?
So thanks, Johnny. I guess there are two angles on this. One is, as Duncan said, you know, this is it's kind of happening anyway, and also that it links back to what was clearly in our industrial strategy, saying, you know, a big push is going to be for net zero, and manufacturing is going to play a key role in that. And COVID has just accelerated that to a certain extent. I think it's also interesting picking up on one of the things from the discussion session earlier, the webinar itself. Thomas Sutton was mentioning this, that by simplifying our supply chains and actually having less available, actually inherently made things a bit greener. Now, that wasn't a choice, but the outcome has been very positive. So there's some reflection on that, I think, as well. And that leads to the design, not just of the products, but the design of the system that is delivering what is needed to the customers.
And at the same time, Carlos, there's a big push from government and other agencies in terms of carbon taxation and emissions regulations businesses are having to adhere to. Do you think these are going to get only ever more stringent moving forward?
I think there is, as Duncan mentioned and as Tim mentioned, an opportunity here to think about not only from the regulation side of things, but to the future sustainability and competitiveness of industries. Let's remember that governments are giving a lot of money and to companies, to manufacturing companies, and many of the governments around the world, we're observing that they're adding some additionalities or conditionalities rather to the support that they're giving. Okay, so we're gonna have this sector deal with you, automotive industry or aerospace industry, but we would expect that you do something to emerge greener from the crisis. So you will, so it is not just about making the processes more efficient. Of course, it is critical to achieve the net zero that Tim had mentioned as well. But from a country perspective, to think about the markets of the future. The hydrogen industry will be a market of the future. Electric vehicles will be a market of the future. And you'll see responses like in Australia having a technology investment roadmap very much focused on those technologies that will create markets for manufacturing industries in the future around green. The national hydrogen strategy in Germany, and the Green Deal in Korea, very much focused on the creation of new jobs related to manufacturing industries of the future that are based on green principles. So I think the regulation is important, efficiencies at the factory level are important, but also thinking about where are the future areas of growth going to come.
It's interesting you talk about the future of jobs or jobs of the future. Tim, where do you see the role of upskilling and reskilling, retraining at this point?
It's an absolutely critical issue. So with what we're seeing with Made Smarter campaign, the critical importance of upskilling for us to really embrace industrial digitalization it's huge. I think a challenge that's emerging at the moment is, given what's happening with so many people being on furlough at the moment, so much stress on just keeping the basic operations of manufacturing firms going, is there going to be sufficient resource devoted to training? On the flip side, this provides a fantastic opportunity to reconfigure what's going on and to ensure that we do have a chance to upskill people. But it's just that really tricky balance that we see manufacturing firms are facing between making sure you can keep the business going, but also investing in the training. But without the investment in the training, it's going to be much harder to emerge from this particular situation. But it is absolutely key to ensuring that we do come out of this stronger.
And I suppose, does the UK government need to recognise that these skills that exist in second and third tier smaller businesses in the aerospace and automotive supply chain, the supply chain and the businesses that have been deeply affected by what's happening, these skills need to be protected? Carlos, what do you think government can do to ensure that those skills are retained?
I think that there's a lot of support that has been given already to ensure obviously the survival immediately of those SMEs in the country. I think that has been welcomed by many companies. In terms of ensuring the availability of those skills after the crisis, I think part of there's ongoing discussions about the future of industrial strategy, and within those, there are discussions sector by sector about what might be possible to avoid losing the skills. But and let's remember that there's a number of ways in which a country loses skills. Yes, right now the emergency is about making sure that the company survives and that those skills are not lost. But there's other ways, for example, in which it might be that foreign corporates buying smaller companies and then taking hold of those skills. It might be that skills in one sector move to other more attractive sector in the service sector, for example. And that is an underlying problem that we have experienced. And I think there's certain work going on in the government, like the Project Defend, that is about mapping the critical supplies in the value chain and supply chains, and considering possible solutions to that's in the government, and the Project Birch as well, which is coming out from the Treasury. So a number of activities are happening in the government to support that, keeping those skills in the UK.
Well, it's great to also be joined by Jag Shrai, the head of Centre for International Manufacturing. Hi, Jag, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We've got a question about Brexit. It's raised its head as it always does. What do you think the response to Brexit will look like? While all the focus, obviously, over the past few months has been on trying to recover and get past the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thanks, Johnny, and great to be with everyone. I think Brexit has, in a way, helped out during the pandemic, because there was a lot of strategic stockpiling that came into good use during the shortages, and it has helped government think about the supply security of medicines, food, and other critical products. But I think it's also highlighted the vulnerabilities of international supply chain. So I think the term essential industries I've seen now being used to now think about what is turning out to a very complex question about where does strategic stockpiling support supply security, and where does local manufacturing actually provide an additional capability that can be drawn upon. And hence this particular issue that came up during the webinar about reconfigurability, and it came up in a number of our presentations about how reconfigurable manufacturing assets become highly attractive, and recent trends on more distributed manufacturing play into that. So I would suggest selective onshoring may indeed result from a review of the crisis, and again that plays into that Brexit conversation.
One additional comment I might just add to that is that, you know, historically the government has looked at manufacturing strategy predominantly through the lens of different sectors to be supported, and I think an alternative strategy that could be examined in the light of some of the comments Jag just made is whether a sectoral strategy is always the right approach compared to, say, looking at manufacturing capabilities broadly. And, you know, actually there's types of manufacturing capability that the UK needs to have as a country, and it may be that capability is not from one sector but across multiple types of sectors, whether it's particular machine tool capabilities or CAD capabilities, etc. It's those type of capabilities are not especially about an individual sector, but they're the sort of things that we've found we've needed quite extensively during the challenges that came up in the COVID response.
And if I may add,
of course, yes.
I think I will agree with precisely that point. One of the capabilities that are cross-cutting in manufacturing is the ability to respond to emergencies, to repurpose manufacturing production lines that Tim talked about before. But one of the responses that we've seen in different countries is actually establishing manufacturing national task forces to make sure that we have that reconfiguration capability, that collaboration capability across manufacturing sectors, to make sure that we prepare for the next crisis. Let's remember that we don't know the shape of the next crisis, and therefore we don't know what the critical goods are. In Australia, they had a problem with wildfires. In Japan was the earthquake. It might be flooding. It might be other problems that might require different types of goods. So just thinking about, let's have a capacity for production of one type of critical goods today does not solve the problem of future crises. So that ability to bring critical mass of manufacturing capabilities, repurpose and respond to the crisis, is actually another type of response that we see happening around the world.
Given that this national need to get this right and not leave ourselves short in the future, do we need to have some sort of clear national level strategy around what to invest in, what to outsource, what to onshore, what to offshore? I mean, are we back to the government picking winners again? Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
I could see that one coming. Thank you, Johnny. It's really, it's the key question, or one of the key questions of the moment. And I think what's really positive is that there are a series of debates going on. People are recognizing that this isn't, it never was, but it certainly isn't now, a niche interest, a thing that some people should think about. It's absolutely front dead center to the issue that Jag was referring to between should we nationally prepare for things and have strategic stockpiling? Should we have the ability to nationally to reconfigure assets as are required? To Duncan's point about the need for effectively industrial commons, a certain level of manufacturing capability that must exist and might potentially, as Carlos says, require direct government support, not just for the physical infrastructure, but also for the people, the skills that are required to make that work. So yes, there is a need for a joined up debate around this, but one of the positives is it is happening now. The slightly challenging thing is there are so many conversations going on about this at the moment, and they're not necessarily being connected. And that's perhaps a concern, just to make sure that we don't lose this wave of enthusiasm by having 100 fragmented debates about it.
Mm. And I suppose aligned to that enthusiasm and the achievements that we've seen over the past several months is manufacturers have suddenly embraced these hugely compressed innovation cycles. Things that would have taken them months, if not years, have been achieved in weeks, if not days. But there's a concern that innovation is predicated on having the money to invest in it. And with manufacturing responsible for 66% of business investment in the UK in R&D, with no money to invest in it or money that they've decided to allocate elsewhere, where is this innovation going to come from, and how can it be supported beyond this pandemic? Jag, what are your thoughts on that?
I think often we're all guilty of wanting more investment in every sector, and universities, of course, being the most important. I think where the opportunity lies is really, for me, there was a great report a few years ago by Lord Sainsbury on Innovation Nation, which was the power of using public procurement. And we've seen the spend in the NHS, for example, the spend we have on medicines. So we have this odd situation where often government will invest in one part of the value chain, let's say R&D in the UK, only to see all the manufacturing or a large part of the manufacturing being undertaken offshore and then procured by the NHS with all the margins added. So I think there's a significant opportunity, I was about to say huge, around using, whether it's the healthcare, whether it's in public procurement, in construction, in various sectors, is leveraging that activity to drive advanced manufacturing, to support the reconfigurability we talked about earlier. So the adoption of new technologies, the digitalization of supply chains. And I think where the strategic conversation needs to be had is, do those new investments target a particular product, or is there a potential to repurpose and reconfigure for supply security? And I think that's where it's a very complex conversation to be had. So public procurement is one pathway.
We are running short of time, and we've had several questions around what manufacturers can do as individual businesses. So we've talked a little bit around the need for more joined up thinking across industry and national strategies, even potentially international strategies. So I want to close this session just by running down the panel. And if each of you could try and distill one or two key thoughts for a management team of a business looking to prepare for the next 12 months ahead with Brexit on the horizon, the prospect of a second wave, maybe in the US or closer to home. What advice can you give these management teams? Carlos, let's start with you.
I think the first one is the engagement that is happening right now in the industrial community is quite encouraging. So perhaps that's part of the first steps, is to engage in the different conversations. As Tim says, there's a national conversation that is going on. We should avoid that only the usual suspects have a view there, and in that will be extremely relevant to hear from SMEs. So engaging in regional initiatives and in national discussions will be of critical importance.
Tim, what are your thoughts on that question?
Two quick thoughts would be, one, picking up on what Carlos said there, absolutely to engage with the debate, but not to be put off by the fact that in the midst of the crisis, I know many, many firms, thousands, I think we counted 14,000 on one source, had been offering help, offering support, and they didn't necessarily receive much response. So there's a slight feeling, a very natural feeling that why bother if no one's going to listen to us? But actually, I think, as Carlos says, things are different now. Now it's a real sense of, okay, things are a little calmer. What can we do to make things better? And the second thought would be around the skills. I know it must be incredibly challenging managing the whole process of survival and furloughing, but the issue of skills was there before and it's absolutely there now. And I think it's really good to see how many initiatives are there to support the upskilling, particularly on digital technologies. Those can only be of benefit as we go forward.
Duncan, what's your perspective?
So just a couple of quick comments. I mean, in a way, I would be saying to a company, you know, don't forget what it is that you do well or have always done well, and stick to that. But perhaps also look at what you've done well over the COVID period to see if you can use that to supplement your capability base. And the second comment would be around this innovation topic we were just talking about a moment ago, a reminder that actually everyone in a company can innovate. It's not like you have to have an innovation organization. And secondly, and then also that innovation can be cheap. So you don't have to do a big spend to get into R&D and new developments. Perhaps time for some low cost grassroots type activities.
And aligned to that, if no one has, if you haven't heard of Duncan and his team's initiative, Digital Manufacturing on a Shoestring, I would urge you to Google it, go onto the IfM website and take a look, because it really does prove that this doesn't take a lot of time or money. Jag, it's left to you for some closing thoughts.
Thank you very much. For me, I would, in the next few months, new R&D projects are going to come through. So I would very much look at revisiting the operating model. Flexible systems, flexible workforce, alternative supply sources. These are in the toolbox for responding in the next 6 months. So 6 months to a year. And for me, very much when looking at the operating model, break that down into that short, medium term, which is the sort of 6 to 9 month window that I think could still be choppy. And then at the more game changing focus on bringing in new technologies, focusing on R&D, and I suspect that's going to be 9 months plus, and that work also starts today.
Absolutely, yes. Time is against us, so now is the time to move. The opportunity is there. We just need to get out there and reach hold of it. Thank you all for your comments and your insights. We have unfortunately run out of time, and as always, we could have run for another half an hour, another hour, but that's the end for today, I'm afraid. So I suppose it only leaves me to thank our 4 speakers, Carlos, Tim, Duncan, and Jag. Thank you for your insights. Thank you, our audience, for posing such interesting questions and challenging our experts. And we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you very much for joining us.